Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're here to talk for an hour with a man who has had an exceptionally rich and exceptionally committed career in music, in film, in art. A man who has also devoted a large part of his life to the political movements in the United States that led to increased freedom for black people and movements in Africa.
White people too.
White people too, sorry. All people. And very recently, the author of a book on his remarkable life, My Song, which I've been reading. I encourage you all to buy it. It's a fantastically informative book and a truly passionate book, an inspiring book, I think. And I think what we'll do this afternoon with Mr. Belafonte is ask him to talk to us about the relationship between art and politics and how they informed his career in film. And maybe if you would start, please, by telling us about your background in theater at the very beginning of your work as an actor, because that we were talking before this event, and you mentioned the importance of the social commitment of the artist and the social role of the artist, and I think that's very deep rooted in your training. Could you tell us about that, please?
Okay. First of all, let me express my great sense of privilege and joy to see so many of you. I'm happy to be here. And I think that I would like to start off by making an observation, and that is that a lot of people try to put me in a context that's easy for them to understand. And I think one of the things that people should understand is that I'm not an artist who became an activist. I'm an activist who became an artist. And it was my good fortune when I was quite young, before I was 20, to discover the world of theater. It was quite by accident. I had come back from the Second World War, where I served in the United States Armed Forces. And at the end of that war, I had absolutely no idea where I was to go and what I was to do with my life. And I worked in a very menial, unskilled job. I was a janitor's assistant. I did repairs in a building. I cleaned the hallways, I cleaned the windows, I repaired faucets. And in such an adventure, I was once given 2 tickets as a tip, as a gratuity, to go to the theater. I'd never been to the theater, and I was very curious to see what it was. And when I went into the theater, a small place in Harlem, in New York, the place where I was born, a whole new world opened up to me. I often say it was an epiphany. When I saw the artists come on stage, and I saw the magic of words, the magic of lighting, the magic of drama, the power of the playwright, I just knew that it was an environment where I wanted to be. I wanted to belong to the people who were doing this work, who were trying to say something to the world. And I saw it as a platform where I could speak about my own desires, my own hopes. And so I stayed in that place, first as a member of the audience, and then eventually I hung around every day, coming back. I would do anything just to be a part of the culture, a part of the people. And it was in this place that I found where I would be for the rest of my life. I had no idea what would become of it. I had no idea what it would turn out to be. It was just an adventure. And as I got into it, I understood that there was much to be learned and much to understand. So I sought to go to places that I was told would help me enrich my knowledge, enrich information, enrich my spirit on what to do with this magical thing called theater. I was very lucky that the most important part of this early part of the journey was to meet a German by the name of Erwin Piscotta. He had come from Germany, he had fled the Nazis, he'd fled Hitler, came to the United States, and he was highly, highly respected. All the universities wanted to get him. He came to America with great fame. He came from the world of Bertolt Brecht. He came from the world of Max Reinhardt. And the kind of theater that they did was very, very powerful, historic, realistic drama. And through him and through his teachings, I saw the deeper meaning of what it meant to be in the dramatic art. It was very fortunate for me that my classmates were people like Marlon Brando, Walter Matthau, Rod Steiger, Tony Curtis. I could go on and on. It was a remarkable young group of actors who had no idea what would become of our lives. But because of Piscotta and because of the teachers that we had, and because of how they influenced us, we were embarked on a journey that gave us an opportunity to do things that left a mark on our time and in our history. Perhaps one of the most important was Marlon Brando. He was truly inspired. He was to the world of art, the dramatic art, the world of acting. He was to that world what Picasso was to the world of painting. He was very dramatic. He was very inventive. And he inspired the rest of us. And I grew up with him. He and I were very close friends. And the reason I'm here today at this festival, not only to pay tribute to Otto Preminger, but to show this film called Sing Your Song, is because I started to make that film when Marlon Brando passed away. I was very sad that we had lost him, but I was even more saddened by the fact that they said so very little about who he really was. They talked about his fame, and they talked about his philandering, and they talked about his adventures as a human being, but they never talked about his soul. They never talked about his heart. They never talked about his social vision. And it was in that context that I most admired him and be inspired by him. He was very committed to the human family. He was very committed to doing films that told you about the lives of people that he thought it was important for us to know about. It was no accident that he picked the films he did. He made those selections out of great consciousness and out of belief that there was a purpose to being an artist. There was a great mentor for us by the name of Paul Robeson. And Paul Robeson once said to us that artists are the gatekeepers of truth. And when our voice is silenced, civilization will have come to an end. That we were perhaps one of the most important instruments in the experience of the global humanity. And so with that rather august thought, with that anointing, with that belief, that the gift of art had a purpose, not just for fame, not just for economic reward, but a purpose to inspire, to instruct, to put the spotlight of drama on issues that affected our lives, to inspire people to know things about other people. It was a wonderful, wonderful place in which to reside. And everything I did in my life was always measured by that consciousness. What do you want to say? Why do you want to say it? And why do you think it's important for people to know? Even the most casual of moments in the theater or in film might have seemed to people like to be just a flirtatious moment, but it was not that. There was a purpose for it. And with this anointing, with this sense of purpose, I set out to do what I did, and the gods smiled on me. People liked the songs that I sang. I tried to do pictures that made a statement about the experiences that I had as a human being in America. But I also found the opportunity through that fame to become very instructive. When I found that audiences were very generous in liking what I sang, the way in which I did it, my first question to me was, what do I do with this much generosity? What do I do with this much power? What do I do with this much extension of the desire to know? And my task was to fill that space with information that I thought would inspire people, that would make them smile at the world in which they lived, and to see hope in the world in which they lived, and to move among those of us who Frantz Fanon, the great social philosopher, once wrote. He wrote about the people whom he called the wretched of the earth. To go among the wretched of the earth, to live among the poor, to be among those who are in the struggle for human truth and human dignity, was the place that I most enjoyed being. And I spent my life in the midst of that social strata, because to be inspired by them was to be inspired by a greater use for my life and the opportunities that I was given. So that's who I am. That's how I came to be. And now you can get on with the interview.
I'd like to ask, since the Preminger retrospective, as you mentioned, is a centerpiece of this festival, and since Carmen Jones was your first major film, did you sense in Otto Preminger this kind of purpose that you have just been talking to us about?
Yes, I did sense that about Otto Preminger, that he had a purpose in life more than just the pursuit of fame. He had a deep social sensitivity. He came from this part of the world. He was Austrian. He had had an experience with Hitler and the Third Reich, and with what happened with Nazism. He came to America in the quest for freedom and opportunity, and he found in America the opportunity to become an artist fully bloomed. And he used his platform to tell stories that he thought touched the deeper humanity. When he stepped out to do Carmen Jones, it wasn't just that it was an idea for a wonderful film. It had a historic and a social purpose. In most of the cinema culture, in most of cinema history, people of color, particularly people of African descent, had always been pictured as subhuman. We were never considered to be individuals with dignity, with a history, with a culture, with a story to tell. We always looked upon as a burden to humanity, that we were people who should always be helped, people who should always be benevolently treated, that we should be instructed kindly by those who had power and had platform. Those who gave us that kind of definition failed to realize that long before they came to be who they were, people of African descent and people of color had experienced thousands of years of civilizations and the development of civil society, and did remarkable things long before Europeans came into their moment of glory and their moment of power. Most of how we were judged was measured by slavery. We found these people who had no humanity, these people who were just a little bit better than the beasts in the jungle. And with white benevolence, you came to rescue us, to help us find our souls and to find our dimensions as fellow beings. And of course, that attitude and that view of who Africans were led us to always be viewed as subhuman. When Otto Preminger came to know us and came to understand us, he decided to take another approach. And when he did Carmen Jones, he saw in that film the opportunity to treat us as anyone else in the world would have been treated, who were telling a story of interest, a story of tragedy, a story of drama, a story of humor, a story that told a story of humanity. And instead of seeing us as we are always seen, as servants, as buffoons, as mindless people running around in the jungle waiting for Tarzan, the great white hope, to come and save us, we were given an opportunity to show our own strength, our own dignity, our own inner spirit as a people. And in Hollywood, to do that at that time was considered a very dangerous thing. First of all, there was a large part of our society that never wanted us to be envisioned as a people that were whole and had purpose and had history. We were always, from their point of view, even today, we were trying to be forced into a subhuman place. But there were others who said to try to do that, to change the norm, to change the way in which we were popularly viewed, would be a reckless expenditure of resources. Anybody who would want to make an all-black film was doomed to failure because there was no audience for that. No one would believe it. No one would understand it. And Otto Preminger said, I disagree. And so he stepped in and used his own resources. And with the alliance of Darryl F. Zanuck and the distribution of 20th Century Fox, these men reached out to some young people who are quite famous in their communities to step to the table and become part of this adventure. It wasn't a picture that was very political. It wasn't a picture that tried to show us emerging from oppression. It was a picture that started to tell a story that was far more fundamental to our common humanity. It was a love story. It was a tragic love story. But what you saw on the screen for the first time in Hollywood was a beautiful black woman. Very rarely had the screen ever shown a beautiful black woman. Most of the time you saw black women who were fat, black women who were servants, black women who were stupid, black women who were always servile and bowing. You saw black men who were always butlers and always taking care of the horses and doing all the cleaning and buggy-eyed and therefore just the humor of the white master. Otto Preminger showed a very different kind of humanity. So in getting Dorothy Dandridge, he put on the screen a woman who was incredibly beautiful, who had a cunning and a smart way. He put other artists, Pearl Bailey, Diane Carroll, a great dancer by the name of Alvin Ailey, who was just very young then, but later on went to become one of the great choreographers in the world of dance in America. The Alvin Ailey Dance Company is one of the most important dance companies that we have. Young Alvin Ailey was part of the dance movement in that film. And he went and got, of course, Harry Belafonte, who at that time was just starting to peak in his popularity. People knew me and knew who I was, and 20th Century Fox thought it was a good way to ensure their investment if they got me, because I already had a kind of an audience, and that they thought the audience would like to see us on the screen. And when they put us together in this film, Otto Preminger did the impossible. The film and what we did it in 10 days. Everything you see on the screen we were required to do in 10 days for the budget, for the crisis, for the way in which the situation was constructed. And we worked very hard, and it was extremely complicated. It was a CinemaScope picture We had to lip sync to the screen. Excuse me. One of the problems that Dorothy Dandridge and I had was that the voices that you hear in the picture was not ours. Someone else did the singing, because the estate of Bizet, who had written this very classic opera from which Gershwin made an adaptation for black culture, the one thing the Bizet estate insisted on was that the origins of the musical as it had been written by Bizet could not be altered. And both Dorothy Dandridge and I were not classically trained. We didn't have operatic voices, so we couldn't sing that great range and those notes. We could have sung it by using other methods and other styles and other interpretations, but they would not permit us to have that license. You had to stay strictly to the score as it had been originally written. So both Dorothy and I, who were singers, said that for the benefit of the project, we thought it was important for us to go along with the idea. So we had Marilyn Horne, who was a great, great classical singer and still is today. She was with the Met. She loved the opera. She was a great Carmen, and she loved singing Carmen Jones. She did Dorothy Dandridge's voice. And a man by the name of Luther Henderson did my voice. And so we had to learn how to lip sync. And it was quite strange to be on set singing and making love to each other with somebody else's voice. And we had to look like we believed it. But we did the film. And when it came out, to everybody's delight and to everybody's reward, the world fell in love with us, fell in love with the film. Otto Preminger was vindicated, and he went on to do other films dealing with subject matters of black life and the black humanity, as well as other things. And that to me was the earliest indication that in picking to do the theater, to be able to say things and to change the way people perceived their own society, the way in which they perceived the people that were their neighbors, was the correct way to live. And I've been rewarded by that fact ever since.
If we could, I want to leave plenty of time to take questions from the audience, because I'm sure that many of you have questions to ask Mr. Belafonte. If I could just jump forward in a almost not quite random way. In your book, you discuss, among many things, of course, many events in your life, you discuss going to the Havana Film Festival for the first time. And you say, you talk about your meeting with Castro and how impressed you were by him. And you also talk about how impressed you were by that film festival, which apparently you went to several times, the Havana Festival. Could you talk to us about, and the reason I ask this is that I want to give you a chance to talk more generally about what you think about film in society. What do you think about the role of film festivals, and what do you think makes an important or a valuable film festival?
I think festivals serve many objectives. They serve many purposes. And we all have choices as to why we commit to doing festivals. I think, like others, I enjoy the anointing. I enjoy the opportunity to be praised and to be given the generosity of audiences. But there is an agenda for me. And that agenda is to take advantage of the moment, that there's an audience that's willing to hear my voice, and to make sure that when they hear that voice, I'm giving them something that they can think about, something that might inspire them, something that might help them understand things they don't understand. I was born into poverty. And the fact of that experience made me very early understand why the people in my family and my mother were treated so cruelly because of their station in life. It was extremely difficult. And because of race, it was extremely difficult to get equal opportunity. And I thought very early that if I never did anything else, I would use my life to change that reality, that I should fight against poverty, that I should fight against racial oppression. I should fight against all oppression. And therefore, anointed with this mission, everywhere I went and everything I did seemed to have been touched by the fact that that was what I wanted to do. In the world of art, I decided that was the thing that I would most use my art to do. The earliest time of my life was influenced by three people. One was a great woman by the name of Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of the President of the United States of America, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a woman of enormous qualifications. She had a great intellect, a great humanity, and she had inordinate power as the wife of the president to do things to change the plight of people whom she thought did not deserve being oppressed. She felt no one deserved to be oppressed, so she fought for our equality. And when she saw in my young life how I used my life as an artist, she asked me to come and to work with her, to be part of her mission. And with that opportunity, I engaged in her mission for a healthier and a more productive way of life. She and a man by the name of Paul Robeson, a great force from the African American community, who was absolutely stunning. He not only had a great intellect, receiving high honors in the universities that he attended, but he also had a great capacity for language. He spoke and wrote and could read in 22 languages, not only all the Romance languages, but in several dialects of Africa. He could speak Zulu and Swahili and Fula and Susu, and he could converse in many tongues of Asia, Chinese, etc. And in his work, he had put together a repertoire that sang the songs of the people whose language he spoke. And people always loved him for coming to their countries and singing their songs. And I thought it was a wonderful way in which to reach out to those who didn't know me by singing their songs. And early on, I began to sing in other languages as well. Not as many as I should have, but I sang in other languages. In that context, when I met Dr. King, who was the third person, Dr. King was 2 years younger than I was. He was 24 when he led the movement in America, and I was 26. Fairly young to be taking on such a large responsibility. But I admired him too. He had a PhD, he came from the university, he had studied theology, he was a great religious philosopher, but he was a liberation theologist. He saw religion in the service of humanity, not as a force to command people, but to inspire people. He used it to teach us about the goodness in one another. And from the very earliest moment, when I joined him in the cause to liberate us in America and peoples of color, he said, the thing that we must remember is that we need to talk to our adversaries. Our friends do not need to hear our voice, although we should always talk with our friends. We need to talk to those who don't understand us, to those who would crucify us, to those who would see us as not worthy of their space. And I found that whenever we went anywhere in the United States of America where black people were against the law to sit someplace or to eat someplace or to sleep someplace, the law said no black people can live here. It was the United States of America that created the rules of apartheid. South Africa didn't invent that. As a matter of fact, those who created apartheid in South Africa learned from the United States. We invented the rules of the separation of color and the separation of class as a matter of justice. And we always spoke to those whom we felt we needed to convince to change their belief that we should be oppressed. I saw how effective that concept was. And when I first met the Kennedys and met John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, they were not friends of ours to begin with. They were gracious. They tolerated us, but they didn't see us with passion. They saw us as something they must do, as an incident to their lives, not as a cause in their life. And we saw them as a cause in our lives that should not be treated just as an incident. We had to reach out to them very deeply to convince them that with their power and with their platform, they had to service the greater humanity, which was to see the world in terms of equality. Believing that, wherever I went and found that there was a social distinction that separated people, that separated ideas, and those ideas were never to come together, was the place that I felt I precisely had to be. In dividing and conquering us is the way in which we stay oppressed. If I don't really come to know you, and you do not really come to know me, you'll never understand that I am really you, and you are really me. Once we come to truly understand that and appreciate that, is when we can look towards developing a civilization that's much more harmonious and much more rewarding. So wherever I went, I made that my rule. Sometimes you could be punished for that idea. So often, when I went to places in the world where there were political distinctions, when one side would not talk to the other, I would always say that is precisely where I need to be. He will not talk to him, and he will not talk to him. And my task is to make you both talk to each other and to understand each other. Now, wherever I went, both sides called me a traitor. The ones on the left saw me as a traitor. The ones on the right saw me as a traitor. And because of that fact, I knew I was doing my job. I said, I'm just where I need to be. When I went into Germany for the first time, I did not want to go. I had come fresh from the experiences of the Second World War. I understood much about the cruelty of Germany, Deutschland über alles, the superior race, the blonde, blue-eyed Aryan, the alienation between cultures and theology, the hate of the Jew, all of these things that made up that system and crushed our common humanity was something that I remembered, and how cruel it was. And I felt somewhat reluctant to go to that place to sing and to bring the instruments of joy to a society that had been so cruel to the rest of the world. But that did not sit comfortably. It was precisely the place in which my own basic belief that you must reach out to those who don't understand you and you don't understand. You must reach out to that community and make a difference. And because of certain friends that I had, a man by the name of George Marek, who was an Austrian Jew, who in the United States became the head of RCA, the most powerful record company in the world. He ran that company. And he saw in me and others of color a chance to make a statement by giving us the opportunity to record and to bring our voices to the audiences. He said, let them hear your art and they will change the way in which they think of you. He did that for Leontine Price. He did that for me. He did it for Duke Ellington. He signed all of these black people while he signed all of these great white artists that he had on the label. He was also a social philosopher. And sitting with him and learning his point of view inspired me. And he said, he was the one that said, you will go to Germany. You will go to Austria. You will learn who those people are. And you'll understand, and they will try to understand who you are. And there's the real purpose for your mission. When I arrived in Berlin. There was no wall. It was a very gray, dark, difficult place. There were not many airplanes in the airport. The time was 1957, I think, if I remember correctly. 57 or 57, I think. And I was one of the first of the popular artists from America to go to Germany. They had many artists in the world of classical music who had gone to Germany because of the high level of the classical art among the German-speaking people and throughout all of Europe. They had a platform, but popular art had not found its way into the mainstream of the European experience. And some of us were the first to come. And when I arrived, there was a law in Germany that said only a small group of people, no more than 5, I think, could congregate at any one time in one place. There was a martial law that says there can be no large gathering of the German public in a public place. And when I got to Germany, there was not a lot of people. There was not great crowds at the airport. That happened later on. So when I went, there was this law. And I would come and everything was segregated. Everything was separated. And I came with this sense of a darkness. When I got to the hotel, I heard a noise outside. And the musicians and all of us who were staying in the hotel came to my suite. And they asked me, did I hear the noise outside? And I listened carefully and I said, yes. And what we heard was a chant. And it sounded like this. And one of the men in the group said, it sounds like they're saying, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. And I said, I don't think that's possible. So we went to the shutters at the hotel room. We opened them. We were on the 3rd floor. And we looked out. And against the law were these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young Germans in the street. And they were screaming, Harry, Harry, Harry. And I got very emotional. I got extremely emotional. Not only for the suspicion, but here, much to my amazement, were these young people whom I didn't even know knew me, who were giving me this chant. And they were expressing their humanity. And in that very moment, I saw what I consider to be the future of Germany. I saw a young people reaching out for another time, another space, to do something that was very different than the history they had come from and the history that they knew. I know there's much to be said about the fact that even in Germany, as in the United States, schools and the curriculum and how our children are taught, they still do not know enough about the history they have come from. They were, in their own spirit, in their own instinct, looking for another place. And therein, I think, sat the great opportunity for the artist to bring their songs, to bring their films, to bring their stories, to bring their art, to transcend politics, to transcend legislation, to transcend cruel laws, and to violate everything, violate the rules, make everybody listen. That's our mission. And so from that moment on, I knew that I would go forever to Germany as long as there was an audience that would want to hear me. And the same thing in Austria. Now, the most touching moment came when at the Titania Palace, which was the theater in which I performed, I sang a repertoire that was filled with songs that were quite popular by the time I got to Germany. One song in particular I sang was a song in the repertoire, which I always sang. I didn't just sing it because I was in Germany. I sang it because it's how I always sang. And it's called Hava Nagila. And it was the hymn and the anthem of the Jew, a folk song in Hebrew, sung by the Jews. Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila hava, nagila vin maha hava. And in the middle of singing this song, all of a sudden this audience that sat very still throughout the whole evening began to go. And by the time I got halfway into the song, they were singing. Hoo, roo, uru, hachim, uru, hachim, belef sameya. And it got fast and fast and fast, and joy and joy. And at the end, it was like being in a beer hall. I mean, it just broke the silence of the thing. And what fascinated me was that here I was with all these young Germans in 1957, 56, singing the song of the Jew, who just a few short years earlier had been the victims of one of the most cruel mass murder attempts known to civilization. And now, instead of crucifying, they were singing this song that said, "Let us have peace, let us have love." And there were all these Germans singing this. Now, what was interesting for me was that here I was, coming from America as a black American, having experienced severe racism, having been even then under the law. It wasn't just the will, there was a written law that said I couldn't sleep in certain places, I couldn't vote, I couldn't eat. All the things that we talk about in human rights, we didn't have them. Now we talk about human rights for everybody, which is to the glory of our own growth as a civilization. But I was told that we didn't have them. And here I was, a black American, singing to Germans the song of the Jew in the language of the Jew. And we were all one family at one moment. And that for me was an epiphany. I said, I have now seen the clarity and the power of art and what my mission was to do. Now to get to your point and your question. I took this long time to explain this because as my relationship with Germany grew and Austria and all of Europe, it was at the time of the Cold War. There was a great strain between the East and the West. We had the Persian missile crisis and the SS missiles, and there was East Germany and there was West Germany, and there was this division between ideology. And these zones were set up with nuclear weapons everywhere, and the death of civilization was very close at the door. And nobody was talking to anybody except in terms of great belligerence. But I loved the idea that although you could contain me, you could make laws. We always say you can cage the singer, but not the song. You may do what you want with me, but you cannot stop the voice from being heard. And I decided that when the people in East Germany called and asked me to come there to sing, not just in the West, although I understood the difficulty and the social difficulty and what the press wanted to say, that I was a communist sympathizer and that I was betraying the democratic principles of the West. I said, you may call me what you want, but I know what I am and I know what I must do. And if I can sing for the Germans in the West, I can sing for the Germans in the East. I do not accept this division because there is an unjust law that says we must not talk to one another. But I was doing exactly the same thing in the United States of America. I just didn't talk to people that loved me. I talked to people that disliked me intensely. I sat at the table with members of the Ku Klux Klan. I sat at the table with Dr. King talking to people who religiously condemned us as an inferior people, as the instrument of the devil. And through Dr. King and others, we always spoke to the enemy because it was the enemy that we had to convince. And you can't convince the enemy unless you talk with the enemy. You can kill the enemy, but we had centuries of that kind of illustration and that kind of behavior, and we never succeeded in making our civilizations whole. So when I got the opportunity because of this cruel law in America about never talking to communists and never going. I said, no, you cannot do that. I don't accept it. And if you want to condemn me, if you want to send us to jail, there are those of us who are willing to pay that price. But I will not have my voice snuffed out because you think it's inappropriate for me to talk to somebody who needs to hear what I have to say. And I need to hear what they have to say. Cuba, which was a big thorn in America's side, gave me an opportunity to go in that film festival to meet several kinds of people. There are many great artists, who were not permitted to come to the United States because they were members of the Communist Party or members of the Communist Socialist belief. And there were laws in the United States that said, you cannot come to America. And some of them were the most powerful artists of the day. Great writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez was not permitted, won the Nobel Prize, a man of tremendous strength and power. And the only way I could meet him was to meet him in some place we could celebrate art. And Havana said, come to Havana, come to the film festival, and you can all meet each other here. So I went there, and I met Georges Amadou, and I met people from Italy that I could not meet before. It was an incredible place to meet those who were contained by the law to not come to America, and Americans who could not go. And there we met. So we went to the places where we could talk, where we could meet. And in that environment, I found movies that I never saw were being shown in Havana, artists that I could speak to that came from Latin America, that spoke in ways that we never saw their pictures in America. You could see them in many places in Europe, but even Europe had not developed a very sophisticated taste for pictures from a lot of places. That's a very recent phenomenon. You certainly had great Italian filmmakers, great French filmmakers from Great Britain, and certainly filmmakers from Germany, but you were a small little group. You were the Europeans, the elite, but you never had pictures that came from other societies and other cultures until recently. And by going to Havana and speaking to those people, by going to East Germany and singing, because in East Germany, I said things that the East Germans did not want to hear. I'm talking about the officials of East Germany. And as a fact, to make sure that everybody understood clearly why I went to East Germany, in my negotiation with the East German leaders to come to East Germany to perform, I said, I can only come if I share the evening with a friend of mine from Germany. So there'll be two of us coming. I used my platform to let other artists share the evening with me if I had the power to do so. And they said, fine, we agreed, until they heard who the artist was. And they said, who are you coming with? And I said, I have a young friend, his name is Udo Lindenberg. And for 3 weeks, there was a very long silence. And then finally, they sent the communique saying, we have agreed that you can bring Udo Lindenberg. Now, what made that so interesting was that Udo Lindenberg had just written a very satirical song that was greatly popular about Hanukkah and the East German leader. And he taunted him and teased him and said, come on, Hanukkah, you know you smoke dope. And we should be smoking it together in the men's room and changing the way in which we live. And the East German youth loved it. And I thought that violation broke the silence. And he went with me. And it was a great moment for those of us who had this platform. So going to Cuba, listening to the Cuban filmmakers, finding so many Italians, Gillo Pontecorvo and others whom I'd never known before, I was able to expand not only my knowledge, but also expand my own personal repertoire. And in that context, I've always found that art was a power and a force that had the moral right to violate the law if the law was unjust. And that's why I've gone to these places and done the things that I've done.
Sorry for my English, I'm not fluent. I hope I can make me understood. I would like to congratulate you for, of course, the actor, the singer, songwriter, but the social activist. And I would like you to ask some question about your time you shared with Miriam Makeba, please.
The same year that I came to Germany, I'd gone to England first. And while there, at the end of the performance at Kilburn State, and a very heady night of celebration and drinking and enjoying the experience. I came back to the hotel and I found a young priest who had come from South Africa, and he'd been waiting all night in the lobby of the hotel to see me. And with him were 3 young Africans, black Africans. And he said to me, "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Belafonte, but I've come here to see you in a crisis. I'm with 3 young Africans who are refugees, political refugees, have escaped from South Africa, and they're being deported by the British to go back to South Africa. And when they go back to South Africa, they will be put into prison for life because they dared to come to Europe and to speak out against the apartheid system in Africa. They did a film called Come Back Africa, done by a young filmmaker by the name of Lionel Rogerson. It was a remarkable, remarkable documentary, which for the first time gave us a look at what the apartheid government was doing. In that film, I saw a young woman as part of the story, and she was singing a song. And I loved the way she sang and her voice and what she was singing. And when they brought in, at the end of showing the film in this private viewing room, they brought in these young Africans, and she was one of them. And the South African government had said that these people, when they go back to Africa, would be put in prison for having spoken out against the South African government. And so they wanted to know if I could help them get visas to stay in London and perhaps help them get to America. So that's what I did as a political service. But I also knew that if Miriam Makeba was able to come to America, I could help give her the platform so she could speak out in behalf of the African people and the struggles of Africa and be heard as an artist. So when she came to America, she was quite concerned that Americans would not understand her, that she spoke in a different language and sang in a different language. And I said, music is universal. They may not understand the language that you speak, but they'll understand the language that you sing. And there'll be many of us to help interpret what you do. And you speak fluent English, the Americans will understand. So we gave her the platform. She became quite popular and was able to speak out about Africa in terms that people understood. She then went on, of course, to become one of the great voices of music. She influenced so many artists in America, along with Huey Masekela and Jonas Gwengwa and many other Africans I brought to America as students who became artists. Because I always believed that one of the things that I should do is to share the platform, share the space of power. Find those artists whom you think are worthy of being heard and give them your platform. Let them stand where you speak. Let them stand and speak to the audience that has come to hear you. And if you are right in the choice that you make, the audience will love it and be rewarded. And that's what happened with Miriam Makeba.
Hello. I guess my question is, actors like you and like Dorothy Dandridge and Sidney Poitier were able to pave the way for Black actors today. But even now, there's still debate about the place of Black actors in Hollywood. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on the opportunity that we now have today.
One of the things that Paul Robeson said in the earliest years as a Black man and as a great force intellectually as well as artistically and politically, he said, you know, it's a great adventure for us in the arts because artists are the gatekeepers of truth. And when our voice is silenced and we surrender telling the truth, you can rest assured that civilization will be at its final moment. And therefore, we must never compromise our charge. We must never compromise that responsibility. One of the things we did in fighting for our space as people of color was to be able to open up the space of truth. Through our art, you'll know who we are. Through our art, you'll know our history. You'll know our culture. That was the earliest mandate from but for not only Paul Robeson, but Sidney Poitier, myself, all of us in that era, at that time, saw this as part of the mission. As has happened to the rest of culture, money has preempted life. Money has preempted values. Money has preempted the things in our lives that are important. Artists have capitulated. They have yielded to the dictates of money. For 30 pieces of silver, we have given up our birthright. We have given up our right to be the purveyors of truth. What most troubles me is that we have now more black celebrities than we ever had before, not just in the world of cinema and theater, but certainly in music. More black artists are famous and are known all over the world. And what is deeply disturbing is that most of those artists have never used that platform to inspire or to instruct or to take the focus of their constituency towards understanding a deeper humanity and to understand the world in a greater context. But that's not just Black America, that's the global moment. What I think has happened is that money and the pursuit of money has touched one of the deeper instincts in the human DNA. We are creatures of greed. We have become extremely selfish as a culture. Our humanity has been blurred by the need to be hedonistically filled with constant pleasure, more material, more goods, more space, more power, so that power becomes an end in itself and it destroys everything else in its path. And where I think we reside is that instead of black artists singing songs and making pictures that illuminates, telling about the tragedy of what goes on in Africa today, the stories of the Sudan, the stories of what goes on in the Congo and the rape of women, instead of artists in Latin America telling the struggles of still millions of people who live in squalor, instead of the films coming out of Asia telling they make films to satisfy the bank. The bank says, here's what you will say. Here's what we will pay for. We own the studios. We own television. We own the press. And you will do our dictates. And most of us have capitulated and said, fine, for your 30 pieces of silver, we will use our voice to tell your story. And we have denied who we are and denied giving humanity a better chance to understand itself. As a consequence, I think we are on a journey in our time, in our global space. We are in a place now where unbridled capital, unbridled money, the power of the bank will lead to no longer a great violent overthrow with armies in clash. That cannot happen unless we're prepared to see the earth destroyed as a cinder, because the only tool left in the final analysis to measure victory is a nuclear holocaust. And since we can't afford that, everything else in that space will be determined by those who use that threat most successfully. So I think that as the Soviet Union imploded, because communism did not work and because the masters of that society became enamored of power, and as the great English philosopher said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, we are now sitting in a time when power corrupts. It corrupts Wall Street, it corrupts Switzerland, it corrupts banks and Barclay, it corrupts everywhere it touches. It corrupts culture, it corrupts religion, it corrupts civilization, it corrupts. It does not enhance. Its mission is that in order for it to change, since we can't kill it, it will have to implode. It will self-destruct. And I think the thing that's most needed to replace what happens when it self-destruct is, what do artists say? Because we are the inscribers of history. You know nothing about the world in which you live if it wasn't for the books that you read. if it wasn't for the songs that you sing, for the scriptures that you believe in, and who wrote those songs, who wrote those books, who told those stories. Artists told them. And I once sat with the Archbishop of Edinburgh, a liberation theologist, a man who deeply believes in religion. And when we got into the discussion of religion and mythology of the written word and scriptures, he said, I settled that question a long time ago, Harry. He said, and I will tell you this. When you read the Bible, forget the science and enjoy the poetry. He said there were great writers who talked about the water dividing and the stone and heaven. So I wish we had screenwriters like that today that could give us imagination. And I really believe that we have yet to, as a human species, come to a deeper understanding of what it is that we must do. And we've turned our back on truth. So that in this time in which we live, I think that if we don't change our choices, if we don't look at life through another prism, we're liable to feed the weapons of our own destruction.
Ladies and gentlemen, all that is left for me to say is thank you, Harry Belafonte, for being with us today.